Hi, my name is Kedar, and I'm a community reporter for rptv. In this episode, we will join a community annual event to commemorate the National Day of Remembrance and Action to Stop Violence Against Women on December the 6th, 2023. The online event was celebrated under the theme United for Change for Awareness to Action, Navigating Gender-Based Violence, Human Trafficking, and the opioid crises in marginalized communities. The event included traditional opening by Kevin Myron from the Toronto Council Fire Native Cultural Center and the traditional hoop dance performed by Athena Tomes. Keynote speaker, Councillor Lily Chang. Spoken word performance spoken by T. Tisani Francis Smith. Panel discussion with community experts and residents to share insight into gender-based violence, human trafficking, and the opioid crisis in marginalized communities. Its impact, tools, and resources to support diverse communities in our city. The panel discussion was moderated by Regent Park resident and co-founder of the Coalition Against White Supremacy and Islamophobia, Walid Kogali. The event continued with a grounding exercise, a moment of silence, and a call to action. This annual event started as a day of remembrance for the 14 women who were murdered in the Montreal massacre that took place at the local École Polytechnique on December the 6th, 1989. And now let's go to the event moderated by Tahseen Rodoshi, Senior Community Engagement Specialist at Aura Freedom International. Take it from here, Tahseen.
Welcome to the annual December 6th event that is dedicated to commemorating the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, and it's also part of the 16 Days of Action. We would like to extend our utmost gratitude for your presence here today. Thank you so much for being here. Each and every one of you plays such a crucial role to making this annual event a success, and we've been organizing it for about more than 15 years now. And remarkably, it's our 5th consecutive year that we've transitioned into the virtual format over Zoom. And whether it's your first time attending this event or you've been around quite a few times, thank you all so much for your support. And before I begin, I'll just quickly introduce myself. Hello again, I'm Tashin. Just double checking, can you folks see the next screen? If not, yeah, perfect. So I'm Tashin Rodoshi. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Senior Community Engagement Specialist at Aura Freedom, and I'm so honored to have been part of the planning committee representing a number of community organizations that have planned and organized this exciting and powerful event over the past several weeks and months. And for today's event, I will be your MC, and I'm so excited to take you along this journey. And we're so grateful to have been able to partner with so many organizations, sponsors, and supporters who made this possible. I would just like to give a quick shout out to the Neighborhood Group, MedTrack, Toronto Council Fire, Elizabeth Fry, Aura Freedom International, Times Change, the Community Corner, St. Jamestown, Victim Services Toronto, a Women's Health in Women's Hands, Neighborhood Pots Teal, and finally, Daniels Corporation, who have been a long-standing partner since the very beginning. And thank you so much for being here and supporting us today. We hope that throughout this event, you will feel our passion and gratitude through the screen and enjoy the entertainment and hold space for some very important and at times difficult community conversations around gender-based violence and foster a space of healing in acknowledgement of the challenges and losses that we've all faced this year. We recognize that today's event can be heavy and triggering at times. And once again, we hope that you take care of yourselves as we explore these topics and hold space with compassion and empathy towards ourselves and others in the room. And if you need to step away or re-enter the space, you're more than welcome to do so. We will be sharing Get Help resources. And once again, thank you for being here and for the courage that brings you all along towards this journey. So this annual event started as a day of remembrance for the 14 women who were murdered in the Montreal massacre that took place at the local Polytechnique on December 6, 1989. At the time of the incident, it was one of the largest mass shootings in Canadian history. The anniversary of the massacre has been commemorated as the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. And today we pay tribute to the lives that were tragically cut short simply because they were women. As we mourn their loss and remember their lives, we reaffirm our commitment to fight the hatred that has led to this tragedy, the misogyny and femicide that still exists till this day. In Canada and around the world, women, girls, to us LGBTQIA+ individuals face unacceptable violence and discrimination. Gender-based violence in Canada has been magnified and amplified in light of COVID-19 pandemic, and gender-based violence is truly a tale as old as time. We know that there have been reports from police services, shelters, local organizations, of an increase in calls related to gender-based violence across Canada. And recently, a number of cities declared intimate partner violence and gender-based violence as an epidemic, including Toronto. The National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women is about remembering those who have experienced gender-based violence and those who have lost to it. It is time to take action. Ensuring the land that we call Canada is free from the gender-based violence, it really requires everyone living here to educate themselves and their families and communities about these issues and really center the voices of survivors in our actions and speak up against oppression and harmful behaviors. There are a number of community organizations who are relentlessly working and facilitating events and campaigns in light of the 16 days of activism. You may have seen some posters being shared, and I hope that you folks are going to take some time to look beyond this event to continue learning about the incredible work that is being done to end violence for good. And as we bring this topic in light, we would love to speak more about the intention that brought us here in today's event. And we do so in an effort to create a world where no women, girls have to live in the fear and live in a community where they can thrive and it's safe for all. But before I even continue, we would love to do a land acknowledgement. And Waleed, I do see your hand.
Just want to make sure that the slides are visible because I can only see the first one, and you went so just to double check that.
Just give me a moment where we'll fix the technical issue really quick. And as we're waiting, we will just move on to our land acknowledgement. Just give me a moment as we pull out the slides. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. And can you folks see it right now? The moving slides. Perfect. Thank you, Waleed. So I'm going to invite Armella to do the land acknowledgement for us.
Thank you, Tashi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Armella Morano from TNO, the Neighborhood Organization. I would like to begin by honoring the Indigenous people and the land we are on today. While we gather today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which all of us call home. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations, and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each, in our own way, move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
Thank you, Armella, for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you all.
And with that being said, we also recognize that this statement is not enough and that our commitment shouldn't end at land acknowledgements. And we encourage you all to continue the journey by connecting with your local friendship centers and learning about the Indigenous history and culture and taking action to uplift the voices and freedom of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, or what we know as Canada. And as we begin our event, we have the honor of welcoming Kevin Myron from Council Fire Native Cultural Center, who has been such an incredible legacy in our community as an amazing community leader and has been sharing an opening for the December 6th event for several years now with his powerful energy. And following Kevin's traditional opening, we will watch a traditional hoop dance performed by Athena. So without further ado, Kevin, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. What an honor to be opening up this event today and recognizing and bringing awareness to violence against women. At Council Fire, we're actually pretty big on that, right? And making sure our men know their roles and responsibilities as men. It's definitely not being violent towards women. Right? So I brought with me today, I brought an eagle feather. Right, and this is in our culture. That's so the Creator can hear our prayers. They say that eagle takes our prayers to the Great Spirit. I brought a smudge bowl. Right, and has some sage in there. Right, and we're gonna light up the medicines and do opening prayer or opening acknowledgements. Okay. I use a cast iron frying pan. Right, it's a reminder that we weren't always allowed to do this. Right, so less than 100 years ago, I couldn't come up and light a smudge. You know, it'd actually be illegal. Further ado, and when you're gonna notice that when I'm doing the opening, and I know a lot of cultures they bow their head when they pray, but in our culture we actually look to creation. Okay, so you'll see I won't be bowing my head. So please don't get offended. Bonnie Crater. Just want to start off by giving thanks for today, giving thanks for this event that we're about to have that brings awareness to women being abused. Right? And just want to give thanks for Mother Earth, everything she provides. Give thanks for all the animals, two-legged, four-legged, winged, then the ones that crawl. I'll give thanks to that water Creator that we drink every day. Please bring those countries that don't have clean drinking water. Please bring them clean drinking water. And even those reservations here in Canada that don't have clean drinking water, they should ask for that Creator. Give thanks for the air Creator. Please keep our air clean from sickness. Keep us safe from my air. Creator, I give thanks for everything that Mother Earth grows, all those medicines, those trees that give life. Creator, I give thanks for all these agencies that showed up to this event today, you know, to gather information, to bring awareness, to talk with their community members in their areas. So we give thanks for that awareness today, Creator. One last thing, Creator, I'd like to give thanks for all the men that are putting their foot forward, right, to do things in a good way. all the men that are bringing awareness to violence, all the men that are working with other men to make sure that our men know their roles and responsibilities. Creator, I give thanks to those men and those women for those teachings. So me and my son Liam, I'll put the medicine aside. Got an opening song we want to sing, right? And at a powwow or at gatherings, right? We sing it's what you call a grass dance song, right? And we have our grass dancers come out. We don't have grass dancers today. Jaden's sick. I was hoping he'd come out today, but he got sick, right? And what those grass dancers do is they say a prayer for everybody that comes to that event, right? That they have a good time while they're there. They learn lots. That they meet new friends, you know, and see new faces and visit with old friends and old faces, right? And that when they go home, that they get there safely, right? You know, so that's what this song's about today. Is that we're gonna sing a song, it's a grass dance song. It's for you guys to have a good day today, right? It's for you guys to, you know, be open and meet people. And here we go. All right, Liam, Joey's here too, right on. We're just gonna do an opening grass. I want to talk a bit more about what counterpart is. Everybody, that was our opening song and opening prayer, right? And they gave me 40 minutes to speak, right? Which is quite a long time, right? But we're gonna have Sage come up, and I'll explain why in a minute, right? When we think about violence against women, right? A lot of us are trapped in that, right? Every man, when it comes to music, when it comes to how you conduct yourself coming into the home, right? Your looks, you know. At Council Fire, we've been working really hard to have our young men like Liam, like Joey, to understand their roles and responsibilities as men, right? And it starts when you're small, you know. So if you see your dad, you know, yelling at your mom, right? You might think it's okay when you have a girlfriend to yell at her too, right? Because that's what you see. So we're trying to get our kids to break that cycle, right? And we're trying to work with our men at Council Fire to break that cycle so that they understand all the signs of abuse and not just the hitting part. Because there's a lot more that lead up to that hitting part, a lot more that lead up to women actually being murdered. There's a bunch of signs before that, right? And do we talk to the boys about jealousy? That's one thing we talk about, right? Having confidence in themselves, right? Be confident in self. So, for instance, if you're worried about, for instance, we tell the boys if some girl is entertaining another guy on the phone, right? Maybe he needs to pick up his game just a little bit. He might have to take her on a better date, something along those lines, right? But we look at culture when we're teaching our boys. Right? Everybody has culture. Everybody has something they follow. You know, a God that they believe in. Native people believe that it's the same God, right? So it's our same God, and we all just pray to the same God. And but in your cultures, there's no one. I can almost promise there's nowhere in that culture does it say yell at your wife or hit your woman or right. So we try to go right back to culture so the kids can learn those responsibilities, right? So when they see man's responsibility, right, because we're bigger, right, might be to work and earn, right. Um, they see by looking at our grandparents, you know, the way they treat their grandmother, how their grandpa treats grandma, how dad treats mom, right. I always tell the boys, you know, when you look at those warriors in the history books, right, you look at Crazy Horse, or if you look at Sitting Bull, right, or any of those great warriors, right, you never read articles about them being abusive, right. Matter of fact, when they sent Crazy Horse, they sent a scout, the U.S. Army sent a scout to watch Crazy Horse, right, and they wanted to see how our men trained, how they became fighters, right, and the scout had nothing to report. Right? He went back to his generals and said, "There's, I don't know how come they fight so strong. They don't train. They don't have a strategy, right? But what we were fighting for was the lives of our women and children, right? So that's what made us strong. So the only thing the scout had to report was that they hugged and kissed their women and children and showed all kinds of love. So, but that's the only thing they could report was that the men, they show a lot of love, a lot of love to their families, right? You know, and we believe that's why they fight so fierce, right? So we're trying to teach our boys that, right? To be a fierce warrior, to be a strong man, right? To be that man of all men, right? You know, it's okay to be kind, right? And that's what makes us men, you know. When you're able to come into the house, right? And instead of coming in angry or having that scrunched face and looking all mad, right? You know, you come in and you embrace that love from your kids, because I can guarantee every dad that comes into a household, all those kids say, "Hi, Dad. You know, I love you," and they come give you a hug, right? They might not do that if you come in all angry, right? And scrunch face, right? And at that point in time, you could probably tell them, I had a bad day, guys. I really appreciate this. And that's some of the ways that some of the teachings that we teach our kids, right? We try to get them to follow those 7 grandfather teachings. We call them grandfather teachings because I believe that they're in every culture, right? And they're really basic teachings, right? They're like respect, love, humility, bravery, honesty, truth, wisdom, right? And if we apply all those teachings into our boys and our girls, because the girls need to know what abuse is too. So we don't just work with our boys, we work with the girls too, so they know what the men's responsibilities are. They know that they're not supposed to be calling names. They know that they're not supposed to hit. They know that they have to be confident in themselves to be a good man. Right? So they use those 7 grandfather teachings there, right? And they're basic teachings. If you implement them in your life, in your kids' lives, right? We find it's been working. I've worked with a group of kids so far, a group of drummers. I've had them since they were about 10 years old. And some of them were 12 when they started, right? But they're all become young men now, right? And when I watch them in the relationships that they have, and I watch them on how they treat their moms and how they treat their grandmothers and how they treat their aunties and how they treat women in the community in general, right? It's been working. I'm not going to court for the kids no more, for assault charges on their women. I'm going to court for adults now, right? Which is a good thing. It means change can happen, right? It just takes time, takes consistency and dedication from your centers, from all your centers, from your communities, and also to have it's really important, a non-judgmental attitude, right? Because when a man's coming for help, right, he realized that he's an abuser, right? And a lot of men, when they take these come to counsel bar, they realize they have abusive behavior, you know, and we don't judge them. We work with them. We try to help them, right? We talk to them about wisdom, about making those mistakes, not making them again. We talk about love, being able to express that love. A lot of men can't express love, and they were never taught how, right? So we try to work with them. We try our best. We try to be non-judgmental. And not every person's going to be okay, but they're going to have those teachings for the rest of their lives. And that might come in handy. So it's about 4 o'clock now. And it's a lot to have. There's a lot of violence in our world. All kinds, right? Everywhere, every country, right? And Council Fire thought it would be appropriate if we asked one of our jingle dress dancers to come dance, right? And this dance here, it's a fairly newer style of dance, and it comes from a lady named Maggie White, Maggie White, right? And she was a little girl. She got really sick, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on with her. They had no idea. Right? So they say they called the medicine man to come talk with her, right? And all these medicine men worked with her, right? And they say that her dad was it her dad? It was her dad that had a dream of this dress.
Her grandfather.
Oh, her grandfather? Oh, sorry, I messed it up. It was her grandfather that had a dream of this dress, right? And had all these coins on it, right? And the sound of it kind of sounds like raindrops hitting a tin roof. But in our culture, it kind of sounds like a rattle, right? Which is that sound of creation, right? So they say they put Maggie in this dress and they brought her into the powwow circle. And the first time they walked her around, they had to walk her around the dress because she was so weak. She couldn't walk. And the second time she around the arena, they say that she was starting to walk. And the third time around the arena, she was starting to dance. And on that fourth round, she was dancing full force. Right? And ever since then, those girls been using that style of dress as a healing style of dress. Right? So we like to have Sage come up and do a jingle dress dance for us, right? And to bring that healing amongst our men, to bring that healing amongst our women, right? And so we're not just remembering those 14 girls that in Montreal in that massacre. We're remembering all those girls, all those women that are going through hard time right now, going through change, and and try and do better in their lives, and just have abuse around them. So we'll do that healing song. Call up again Joey and Liam. We'll do a healing song for this. Stage, you dance right there, okay? Me and boys are gonna both sit on the side here. Okay. All right.
We can't hear anything.
Hi, Kevin. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, Paige. Thank you, boy. That was great. But I want to leave you guys with this, okay? Before I go, it's called Ki Je Nin.
Mhm.
Okay, Ki Je Nin, Ki Je Nin, and you can use that word. It's a native word, right? All it means is kind man, right? And I want you to teach it to all your boys, right? So when they hear that word, Ki Je Nin, Ki Je Nin, you know, it just reminds them to be kind, right? So if your sons are getting upset, Ki Je Nin, right? You know, I do it with my boys. It works, okay, right? Or just even say be kind. But you can say the native word. It works better. Ki Je Nin. Okay, guys, have a good night. You know, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Shimigwech. And as part of the second part of our traditional opening, we will be sharing a quick video from Athena, who is going to be doing an incredible hoop dance for us, and we'll be playing it for you folks.
Bonjour, Athena Nindishnikos, Toronto Nudujnova, Nimki Beneshi Nodam, and Minimum Dum Nangwa. I'm happy to be here today. So today I'm going to be doing a hoop dance performance for you guys, or a little demonstration, and I hope you enjoy.
And we'd like to thank Athena for sharing the incredible hoop dance video with us. Truly, it was just so inspiring to see your performance, and there's just such great feedback and comments being shared in the chat box. I'm sure that we are feeling the energy, even though we are here watching it virtually. So thank you so much, Athena. And without further ado, I will be resharing my screen so we can continue with our programming as well. Perfect. So Can you folks hear me now? Perfect. I hope there is no echo. And of course, we start today's evening. We want to share a quick overview of what you will be expecting as we proceed with the event. And as you know, this is all about United for Change, from awareness to action. We'll be highlighting gender-based violence, human trafficking, and opiate crisis across marginalized communities. We will have a special guest speaker, Councillor Chang. I see you're here already with us, so thank you. And we'll have exciting spoken word performances. We'll meet brilliant and expert community leaders and advocates to share their wisdom. And we'll also have a moment of silence near the end. And we'll quickly go through some virtual house rules. I love the support and engagement that we already have in our chat box. So please, we hope that there's going to be a collective energy towards building a positive space with no hate, disrespect, discrimination, as it will not be tolerated. There is a Q&A function that's available. So if you folks have any questions for panelists, you can feel free to ask them there, and we'll be going through the questions as there will be a Q&A opportunity after the panel discussion. We will also be sharing resources in the chat box, so please look out for that. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our brilliant Councillor Chang, and it's such a privilege for me to do this as we are inviting her into this event, as Councillor Chang has been such an incredible force and support to amplify the importance of recognizing gender-based violence and intimate partner violence in Toronto. And she has been actively working with so many community partners to make the epidemic announcement happen alongside of Mayor Chang. And for those of you who don't know, Lily Chang is the councillor for Ward 18 Willowdale. You can see her great accomplishments shared in the screen. I hope you folks take some time to read it, and I'll allow Lily to introduce herself as well. So Lily, the stage is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Tashin, and thank you everyone for being here today. I think it's very important that we set aside time to consider the impact of violence against women, and as we consider how we should all be working together to eliminate its very existence. I thought I'd start with a little bit of my story, which interweaves gender-based violence with my own journey to finding my own voice, and now growing a voice to be a champion to fight in intimate partner violence. So in my 20s, I found myself struggling with depression, and I couldn't control my emotions very well. I often thought about suicide, and I would say I spent a good decade fighting demons that I didn't know where they came from. And as many victims do, I blamed myself. I thought, what is it about me why is it I can't be like a normal person who is calm and composed like the people that we see on television? And it actually, interestingly, wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I connected the dots. So I spent an incredible amount of time and energy going through some vicious cycles and some really dark moments. I had an eating disorder as well, and I went through therapy, and sometimes you just could feel like you're grasping, but you don't know how to find your way out. And I even had friends give up on me, like who literally would say, I can't help you. I don't know how to help you. But I don't know how to be your friend anymore. So there were some really difficult times. And, you know, I'm really grateful because along my journey, I have met woman after woman who has stayed with me, even when we couldn't name what it was, believed that there was a bridge that I could cross somehow and that I could find my way. And so it is on the shoulders of many women who journeyed with me that I was able to overcome some of the significant challenges that I had. So a couple of weeks ago, Or Freedom held an event, and we had the flag raising at City Hall, wrapped in courage. And Carla Neto from the Etobicoke Habitat for Women talked about what happens to survivors. And she shared, things that perfectly described the struggles that I went through. And it was a bit of an earthquake for me because I had never connected those dots. So I grew up with violence at home, both verbal and physical. And as many children do, I thought it was normal. Eventually, I was able to stand up for myself, but I wore the damage, and I didn't know it until 2 weeks ago. So as I consider my journey, I feel that in many ways you realize, the stars kind of align, and this journey of where I am now is very much interconnected with the trauma and abuse that I have gone through. And I think about the title of this book that I sometimes think about from time to time, which is called The Wounded Healer. And in many ways, it is because we're wounded that we bring healing to others. And I hope that in my current role that I have the opportunity to bring healing to systems that can bring healing to women. So how did I become a politician from after such a long journey of struggling? Well, it started when I became a mom, and I looked at the world, and first of all, I saw very few racialized women in leadership, especially in politics, and I worried about the future that my children were going to inherit. And so I started to organize in my community, and I think, well, what first started was I was a lonely mom with a baby, and I was new in a condo neighborhood, and I knew nobody. And I thought to myself, I can't be the only lonely mom here. So I decided to start a Facebook group. And long story short, the Facebook group kind of grew rapidly because all moms need a village. And that group, grew from 10 moms to 100, and now over 12,000 moms. But in the journey of building that group, I started to meet women who were struggling with intimate partner violence, and even had to call the police when a situation was described and then the woman disappeared and we weren't able to find her, and the police were able to find her, and luckily she was okay. But all this to say, when we are gathering a large group of women in the thousands, well, you think about the statistics of how many women face intimate partner violence, you will inevitably find some victims in your midst. And I remember it was, I think, late at night, maybe 11 p.m., midnight, and I started to get messages about a mom who was fleeing her home because of violence, and she was 8 months pregnant, and she had 2 little kids with her. They were standing in front of a police station in the winter, freezing cold, and because of COVID, the police would not let her in. So she called for support. She called 211. Shelters were full. She was on hold. And then a group of us on Facebook started to try and help her. And luckily, after, quite a bit of effort, we found a shelter bed. It was a 45-minute cab ride away, but we found a ride for her. And if we had not been there, she was, in fact, encouraged to go home. from the police. I actually met with this woman a few years later, so not too long ago, and she is good now. It's so good that she is thriving in her career. And we know that sometimes it can take up to 7 times to leave a partner, but she was able to be resolved and was able to establish her new life with her kids, and she's doing great. And it was so encouraging. But I think about how not everybody has a digital village around them in a critical moment, rooting them on, finding the resources. And I was so disappointed, just the long wait. That when a woman has the courage to actually leave and they're reaching out for help, and when not only can you not get a bed, you're being told perhaps you should go back, that's the wrong thing to happen. So that, is one of a few incidents where I really rubbed up against the gap that I see. And I'm not a social worker. But because of my Facebook group and then later on my work in my neighborhood, I became someone who people would come to when they were looking for a way out. And I ended up helping a few women to leave their situations, and always with the hope that, and the knowledge that we all need a village, right? We often say, it takes a village to raise a child, but we all need a village. And actually, that is what I really value about all the frontline organizations that are in the arena of fighting violence against women, that these women who are fighting it every day. In fact, I'm really humbled to be a keynote speaker here, because actually they should be the keynote speakers. I'm here to amplify, to support, to multiply, but so I'm extremely humbled to be here, but I'm so grateful for the women I have met at Women's Habitat of Etobicoke, Pamela from the Native Women's Resource Center, Marissa from Aura Freedom, Sammy from YWCA, Harmy from Women Act, and Deepa from Schleifer Clinic are some of the women that I have met with. And they are the village that, they're working on being the village for women as they're trying to find their way out. And it's kind of, I feel like many of the women who work in these organizations are also survivors themselves. And we're all holding like our little flashlight and saying, come on, come this way. Like and maybe we can't shine the whole path, but we help each other get to the next step. And so I'm grateful that, this process has in effect shown to me the existing village that we all have. We all kind of play our own role, but then together, as we work together, and that's one thing that I think about women's leadership, is that we are collaborative. When we do things, it's not about trying to amplify yourself or achieve something like as a goal. And it's more about, okay, like we all hold different pieces of this puzzle. How can we work together to put this puzzle together? And that's kind of where we're at right now. So since our Mayor Chow declared intimate partner violence as an epidemic in the city of Toronto, I've been meeting with these wonderful women to figure out a pathway to how we can meaningfully interweave all the divisions in our city that have intimate partner violence as one of the priorities that they're trying to address. And that includes Toronto Police Services, it includes SafeTO, it includes Toronto Public Health, it includes gender and equity, it includes 311. Every division has some piece of this puzzle, but because it's complex and vast, what I think has happened is it has lost clarity, energy, and synergy. And so we have siloed efforts that are not moving in a meaningful way. And so what I'm trying to do is to balance the urgency of the matter, but also having a meaningful and authentic journey with the women from the organizations that I named to make sure that they have a voice at the table. Too often, the city is so big and there's so many systems in place. And too often the people who actually see what's happening on the ground, they don't have a way to meaningfully impact the complexity of our city. So here's where I feel very grateful to kind of be in a place where I can try to pull those threads together and try to find a meaningful way forward. So we've been talking about that journey forward and how we can, for example, try to improve training that is provided to people who are taking phone calls at 211 and 311, and look at how training is provided to Toronto Police Services. And because I'm on the police board, I'm also on the Service Excellence Committee that is looking at our 311 services. You just have to think, for such a time as this, right? How did all of this align? And so the story that is kind of being revealed as we walk it out together is that, through my own personal journey, and this has also been revelatory and healing for me to learn more and understand my own journey. But then to be in a position, and I think about, the tired mom with a little baby thinking, I'm so lonely, what can I do? To now, because of that moment, being empowered to uplift the voices of women who might not otherwise have a voice at the table. And really that is why I went into politics, because too often I feel like our systems really reduce or can't hear many of the most important voices that need to be heard. And when I walk down the street and people sometimes look so tired and so anonymous in our big city, in my heart of hearts, I'm thinking, each person, each of you who is here with us today, you all have a story and a voice, a lived experience, and your voice matters too. And my job is to create pathways for the voices of my community, the people I represent, including the women that I'm currently journeying with, to make sure that their voices, your voices, have ways to shape our city, our services, and our policies. And that is what democracy should be about. It should be not just going to a voting on election day. Yes, that's an important part of democracy, but showing up and sharing your truth and helping to shape how the city grows and how services are developed and evolved. So sometimes I think the struggle for all of us is that we see this epidemic. Women are dying. I was at the Aura Freedom event, and I think there will be a mention of that event later, so I won't share too much detail because I don't want to be, give a spoiler. But at the event, we did talk about the word femicide and how uncomfortable people are with that word, and the fact that 62 women have died in the past year, which is a tragic number. And these aren't numbers, they're people. They're probably, a lot of them were moms. And so we think about the weight of that. But because intimate partner violence, violence against women, gender-based violence, because it's so hidden, we don't treat it like an emergency. Currently, the city has many things that we have identified as emergencies. For example, homelessness, housing, mental health, addiction. These things are serious issues, and we have put tremendous resources in that direction because it's visible and it's rubbing up against people. But gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, is often behind closed doors. The numbers are staggering, but you don't run into it on the street. It doesn't make you uncomfortable when you're out taking your kids out for a walk. And because it's so hidden, it doesn't get the same urgency that I would like to see it receive. So this past summer, I went to an incredible event. It was a celebration. It was a somber celebration, celebrating the passing of Kira's Law. And for those of you who don't know, this woman, Jennifer Keegan, her daughter was murdered by a previous partner who was abusive, and she passed this law in the name of her daughter, Kira, and it ensures that judges receive education on domestic violence and coercive control in intimate partner and family relationships. And what I was really moved by at this event was it was an effort to pass this law that was undertaken across party lines. So you had conservative, liberal, Green Party, and NDP representatives working together to pass this law that is hopefully going to save lives. I'm sure it will save lives. And I'm so, I don't know if happy is the right word, because it comes at such a tremendous cost, but I'm grateful that Jennifer, Kira's mom, could turn her pain into something so powerful and meaningful. But it shouldn't take the death of a child for politicians to put down their political stripes and work for what is the right thing to do. And so we know currently the provincial government has not agreed that intimate partner violence is an epidemic. They have not agreed to pass that. And so there's still these political divisions that prevent us from moving forward in a meaningful way. And the other, I think, difficult piece is, we look, because of the governments and the budgets, we often think, oh, that's that level of government, so it's not my problem. And in some ways, I feel like the city has, although there is a genuine intention, but jurisdictionally, we might say, well, violence against women is a provincial responsibility. So that is in part why it hasn't been so clear how the city can take a role in fighting the epidemic. But I am here and I am committed to working with frontline organizations who see the complexity, the pain, and the gaps to amplify your voices, your experience as survivors, and to make sure that our city is meaningfully making change that can better support women, that women will not fall through the cracks, that when a woman makes that incredibly courageous decision to say, I am going to leave, which is, as we know, one of the most dangerous moments for many women when they make that decision, that they have the full support that they need. And I see, in the chat, the mention about the economics of it. And yes, it is very true that a lot of women, it's the calculus of, can I survive? Can I raise my children if I leave my partner who contributes financially to our family? Can my family survive? And we need to make sure that our systems, and so this journey, I hope that we can do something meaningfully, that we will have measurable outcomes. So that's also a challenge that I've seen. Governments can say it's a priority, but unless you put some measurable outcomes on paper, it can easily lose momentum and be buried in the many crises that a city faces. So let's work together. Let's listen to each other. Let's learn from the frontline organizations and the survivors. And we need to work together, because I will hold up your voices and amplify them, but sometimes we'll need to advocate too together, because sometimes, because of the invisibility of it, people don't put the resources and attention that need to be there. So let's be loud. Let's be persevering. And I know, like, when I meet these women from these organizations, they are relentless in their efforts. And I really appreciate their passion, because they do that at great cost. They're not there making the big dollars. They're not there for the fame. They are doing it because they really care about this issue. And so let's work together. Let's put down our political agendas that people have, and let's try to bring meaningful change. And my commitment to you is that I will not give up trying to bring change from inside the city. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Councillor Chang, for the inspiring words, for your vulnerability and sharing your story. Your efforts with Mayor Chow to address the issues in Toronto is not gone unnoticed. And I especially loved your approach about healing, that bringing healing to others and bringing healing to the system that will ultimately bring healing towards women. I think that's quite unique, and it's my first time hearing it. And especially about this issue, it is invisible. There can be a lot of frustration and anger towards the system that truly is not there to actively support survivors, and many times that it's devastating and very traumatic for many. So thank you so much for all the efforts and all the words, and honestly continuously supporting and listening to grassroots organizations and community organizations, and even attending this event. I'm sure the folks in the chat could agree, and I already see a lot of positive messages in the chat for sharing your powerful words. I hope that you can stick along and watch our event unfold. So thank you once again, Councillor Cheng, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Tasheen. And I just want to put my email in the chat. If anyone wants to reach out to my office and would like to participate in our efforts, you can let us know. Thank you.
And I would also want to mention that there are TNG staff present with us today. So if you folks have any questions and concerns, need that support, please reach out to the TNG staff here. And as we will be moving along with the program. So as we know, for today's event, the topic is all about exploring gender-based violence, human trafficking, and the opioid crisis. Councillor Chang mentioned a lot of great facts and really set the tone of what we need to do. We really need to have actions that needs to be taking place. I think we are gone beyond awareness and really we need to find ways that we can support one another. And the reality is that femicide is real, and femicide is killing many women and girls just because of their sex or gender, and mostly by men who are driven by misogyny and need to maintain that power and control over victims. It is deeply connected to gender inequality, patriarchy, colonialism, and it's entrenched in the beliefs of the roles between men and women. Femicide is a hate crime, like many race or religious motivated violence, because misogyny, it is a hatred of women, often underpins male violence against women and girls. And we need to recognize that gender-related aspects of these murders for women and girls and how they are different from the killings of men. I also encourage you folks to look into the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability as a resource to learn more. We also know that when it comes to gender-based violence and violence against women, it is a manifestation of unequal power balance. That human trafficking, it's a human rights abuse that thrives in situations of inequity, and that Indigenous women continue to experience higher levels of violence, and especially they are 12 times more likely to be murdered than any women in Canada. And that's just such a heartbreaking fact. And that Indigenous women and girls only make up 4% of Canada's population, and yet they're 50% of human trafficking survivors. And the stats that we share here with you today are just a representation of the ones that are reported, because the numbers could even be higher. And we'll also be exploring the opiate crisis, the opiate crisis that has touched almost all parts of Canada. Stats shared by the Public Health Ontario demonstrated that there is an increase of opiate-related harms in Ontario for more than a decade. More than 2,800 Ontarians died from opiate-related causes in just 2021. And as we explore these topics today, we must acknowledge the colonial context and be critical of the systems of power that continue to fuel gender-based violence, human trafficking, and opiate crisis. We'll be unpacking this even further in a very exciting panel discussion, and we hope that you'll have a lot to take away from the conversations that we'll be having today. So I encourage you folks that you'll be gentle with yourselves, create spaces to further reflect on how violence is really impacting each and every single one of us across many communities. Bring in an intersectional lens and be honest with like the hard grief and loss that impacts so many of us who have experienced throughout this year and years before. And I know for a fact in my lifetime, probably will not see the end of the violence, but what are some of the actions and efforts that we can take now that can be seen across generations that to come? And so before we dive into the panel, we actually have a very exciting spoken word piece by T. And I'm so excited to introduce her because T is such a powerful force, and spoken by T is a spoken word poet and performer from Toronto. Deeply inspired by the sounds and passions of old school jazz in collaboration of soulful hip hop and R&B, T creates musical sounds that is unlike any others. And she recently actually released her first single called P, Please in November. So we encourage you folks to check that out. And she spent many years teaching and connecting with youth, young adults through mentorship and facilitating and expanding on writing and expression, as well as performance techniques. So we'll be sharing T's spoken word piece with you folks today.
Hi, my name is Spoken by T. I usually just go by T. I'm a poet, spoken word artist, performer, facilitator, creative, and in honor of the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, I have actually written, I wrote a new poem, it's handwritten, and I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna perform it for you because this day is important. It's one that hits home. I'm absolutely honored to contribute to any sort of conversation that fuels awareness and builds strength and resilience around conversations, and just topics like this because we have a lot of healing to do as not only women, but also an entire society, an entire streamline of history. So with that being said, I'm gonna read this and yeah, I hope you like it. I hope it's something that you feel from, you resonate with, and yeah. So, she's defined by more than what her body can hold. By stories told of moments long ago where womanhood had no comfortable home, it's been century-long arguments. Fists in the air, educating for what's fair, risking lives. And lifelines trying to pave the way for brighter times, the right times. Lighter eyes that aren't filled with hate and fueled by pain. She's seen her mother in moments she wishes she couldn't remember. Resembling rag dolls, flowing to sad songs, punished for never doing wrong, she quickly learned it was who she was that was wrong. They don't talk about this though. Those memories that may be as selective as responsibility. Thieves stealing smiles by the hands of stability. There's too much humility in admitting you have no safety. There are women who walk. There are women we walk by, who define themselves with these memories, women who still learn to love genuinely. These women are the reason we are here. We need to protect them with the strongest shield, erase history of mystery, searching for answers as to why she watched her baby girl cry. She watched her baby watch her cry. Saltwater streams creating dents in between, trust against love. The horror was always seen. We need to talk about these moments. Push to the back of our minds realities we choose to ignore. Love looks like love in loving shapes and forms. This is something we have felt. While we crave to be adored, we deserve to be adored. Because we're fueled by so much more strength than our body can hold. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, T, for such an incredible performance. I literally have goosebumps hearing you speak, and I'm sure folks are in similar pages. I see a lot of emojis going up. Words can truly move and make change happen, and I think it's so incredible how you can convey such great message through your spoken word. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And without further ado, I'll be resharing my screen one more time. I hope you folks can see this. And for our next slide, we'll be sharing Oral Freedom's femicide campaign. We know that every 48 hours in Canada, women and girls is killed, most often by a man simply because she's a woman. Femicide is one of the most violent manifestations of misogyny against women and girls, and it is an ultimate control for women and girls that dictates their fate and ultimately their death. Misogyny, the hatred of women, is a huge driver of femicide all around the world. And in fact, Canadian government has yet to officially recognize the term femicide in their legislation. Femicide is real. It's happening in Canada. And Oral Freedom's recent femicide campaign brings that important issue to light because we cannot no longer be ignoring it. Recognition is one of the most extreme form, like recognizing that this is one of the most extreme form of male violence against women is truly one of the first steps towards addressing it. This video is hard-hitting for sure, and we highly encourage you to take some time for yourself, do what you, and we also encourage you folks to sign the petition that will be shared in the chat box to really call the government of Canada to take meaningful steps and actions towards ending femicide across the country and declare femicide an emergency in Canada. I'll be sharing the video with you folks right now.
there's a lot of time and effort put into creating a piece like this. Every single detail, every stitch is made with care. We figured out the proportions of the bag, what fabrics would work best, what had the most body, where the zipper placement would be, what would be best for lining the bag, where the handles should go. We've chosen a delicate pink, soft lining, red handles with a matching red zipper, a clear pocket to see any special belongings.
And it is truly one of a very powerful piece. And once again, we'll be sharing the petition link that calls the government of Canada to take meaningful steps towards ending femicide for good and to declare femicide an emergency here today. And if you would like to learn more about what femicide is and more about the stats and information, I can certainly send and share the Or Freedom's microsite on the chat for you folks to view as well. And without further ado, I'm very excited to share the next part. And I know you folks are waiting really long to meet with our panelists. And before I do that, I will be introducing our incredible moderator. And I'll be bringing up my full screen one more time. So just give me a second. Can you folks see my screen? Or it's just loading. Perfect. I also see Waleed here with us. So I'm so honored and excited to announce our incredible moderator, Waleed. Waleed has been such an incredible force for our planning committee, sharing his insights, and he has held so many meetings with us, sharing his wisdom and the way he's been involved with our community. And if you folks don't know who Waleed is, Waleed has lived in the Regent Park with his family for a very long time, since 25 actually, and works to champion issues such as affordable transit, environmental stewardship, equity, and human rights in both the community and across the city. As a Canadian Muslim who has immigrated from Sudan and has experienced firsthand what it's like to be a newcomer youth growing up in Toronto, he is the co-founder for the Coalition Against White Supremacy and Islamophobia, and a coalition of 150 or 170 organizations. Waleed is a community mentor for youth experiencing marginalization, an advocate for education, career opportunities, as well as meaningful youth participation in public discourse. Thank you so much, Waleed, for being here. I'll pass on the mic to you to introduce our incredible panelists.
Thank you, Tasha, and I hope you can hear me, and so grateful to be here.
I'll pass on the mic to you to introduce our incredible panelists.
Thank you, Tasha, and I hope you can hear me, and so grateful to be here. Well, Tasha introduced me very eloquently. I'm just gonna quickly introduce our amazing panelists. I hope folks can hear me, and if you can, just let me know. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we have three amazing panelists that I'm going to introduce, and they're going to start us off with some opening remarks before we delve into the questions that are theme-oriented. We have about 6 questions. So our first panelist is Jasminda Sekhan, who's a Community Development Coordinator at Victim Services Toronto. Welcome, Jasminder. Jasminder is a gender justice advocate through an intersectional feminist and trauma-informed lens. She's a graduate of the University of Oxford's Masters in Criminology and Criminal Justice, and has a double degree in political science and criminology from the University of Toronto. Jasminder has extensive, excuse me, Jasminder has extensive experience working in the field of gender violence prevention, including human trafficking prevention, honor-based violence, sexual violence, and intimate partner violence. Jasminder is the Community Development Coordinator of Victim Services Toronto, where she supports community programming, provides strategic direction on EDI. Her lived experience as a South Asian woman who is a survivor of gender-based violence inspires her to work through an equitable and anti-oppressive framework in everything she does. Thank you, Jasminder, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's my absolute pleasure.
Welcome, Jasminder. Our next panelist, and hopefully we can get Ty on the screen as well, Ty Saleh, who is the Red Mat Collective Director and is also the Red Mat Healing Center owner. Ty Saleh is, my goodness, very involved as a Lululemon ambassador with YECAP, ERYT 500. She came to Canada as a refugee in her youth. Today, she's a founder of Red Mat Collective, and like I said earlier, the Red Mat Healing Center, and is working towards her psychotherapist designation. A dedicated passion for healing through her own traumas has guided her desire to do more for and within the community. Ty's approach encompasses a compassionate and intellectual lens geared towards uplifting and empowering BIPOC and women of color, gender expansive folks. Ty is a womanist and an intersectional feminist who believes in uplift and empowering women, gender expansive folks through intersectional wellness, therapeutic yoga, and education on trauma healing to build resiliency and autonomy. Thank you so much, Ty, for what you do in our community, and welcome to our panel.
Thank you so much.
Our next panelist is Rob Johannes. Rob Johannes is the Health Promotions and Policy Development lead at Fred Victor. Rob Johannes works in health promotions and policy development with Fred Victor in Toronto. He co-chairs the St. Jamestown Service Providers Network, sits on the board of directors for the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and Working for Change. He's on the Executive Committee of Health Promotions Ontario, advisory councils for the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, and Toronto's Police Race-Based Strategy. He was Executive Director of the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, who spearheaded the opening of North America's first supervised injection facility and worked on successful Supreme Court challenges affirming harm reduction practices, the safety of marginalized women in sex work, and the right of individuals without fixed addresses to vote in federal, provincial, and municipal elections. Thank you so much, Rob, for your amazing contributions to our community, and welcome to our panel.
Thanks for having me, my friend. Good to see you. Good to see everyone here today.
Excellent. So we're going to start off our conversation with some opening remarks. I'm going to invite our panelists, starting off with Jasminder, and then Ty, and then Rob, just to make some introductory remarks before we get into our 6 questions. Jasminder, you want to start us off?
Absolutely. I just want to share what an honor it is to be here today with each and every single one of you who deeply cares and is passionate about ending, gender inequality within our society. I think, it's not just we think, oh, it's a women's issue or it's an issue that's impacting LGBTQ plus youth only. No, this is an issue that impacts each and every single one of us. This is an issue that's taking place in our society. And so I'm always so grateful when I come to community events, which are organized and we're able to have these really important discussions of how we can come together and move forward. I'm an expert in gender-based violence, not just from an academic standpoint, but also from a lived experience standpoint. And, as Councillor Chang really highlighted earlier today for all of us, that many of us that do this work, many of us that are here today, many of us that are advocates are also folks who are survivors and are able to really, create a change and make an impact in our community to create, something better, a better world that we're able to pass on to future generations. And I'm just so grateful that all of you are a part of that journey alongside myself. And so I'm honored to be here alongside the other panelists with Waleed, and all of the other wonderful folks from the community that have come out to this wonderful event.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Jasminder. Ty, go ahead.
Thank you. So, hi, marhaba, ahlan wa sahlan. Bonjour. How is everyone doing today? I want to first start by offering thanks to all of you for being here. Not only just for deciding to occupy this space, but I know in my heart that many of you are also here either through lived experience or through close relations to someone with intimate experience. And that has me reflecting on how heavy this conversation might be for many of us. And I do really hope that each one of you, as we talk, as we discuss, as we share, does the work of honoring yourself and your capacity so that you can continue to be here and that you can continue to do the work. I am an advocate of radical self-care, which means the whole point of self-caring for yourself is to come back into community and do the work. So take pauses, have drinks, do whatever you need to stretch, give yourself permission to show up authentically, even if that means taking pauses. In terms of my work, everything that I do comes from lived experience. And as Waleed mentioned, I came to Canada here as a refugee, so experiencing gender-based violence both in Sudan and here in Canada, Turtle Island to Toronto, might look a little different, but is anchored in the same thing. So this work that I show up for, the labor, the hours, and all that I do is also a part of my own healing journey. And I think it's probably just that for many of you. So thank you for choosing to be brave and for choosing to be here and for choosing to do the work.
Thank you, Ty. Rob?
Wonderful. Wow. Thanks for the articulate and beautiful introductions, everybody. I am always conscious of walking the talk of allyship. I do acknowledge that I am someone who identifies as male on this issue, which, may be seen as something that is not mine, but it is. It's all of ours. And that's a big reason why I am here. I got my master's degree in women and gender studies and then became a professor in the women and gender studies department at Simon Fraser University. And I just saw that as an act of demisogynizing myself as an essential life skill. I wasn't consciously acting, but there were so many things that I needed to deprogram in just terms of how I operated and how I lived day to day. And that's something that we can often forget. Even if you are marginalized, I am a first generation Punjabi of immigrants. I'm a person with lived experience with substance use, with homelessness, with suicidality. But we still have to recognize where we can utilize our voices as allies. And we have a lot of, deprogramming of ourselves to do in that process. And the great thing about women and gender studies is that it was a very activist-oriented form of education. It wasn't just about being on the university. It was about how do we bridge this into practice. And a lot of that then turned into being involved with the opiate crisis, which is something I've been working on for the last 20 plus years now. It's something that impacts us more than we know, and we don't need to make it a crisis when it impacts affluent communities, which is usually what happens. It's communities like those that we live in, which are often most affected. And it's something that we don't talk about. Similar to gender-based violence, suicidality, substance use is something that we just kind of avoid talking about. If somebody dies of cancer, we'll talk about it. Someone dies of drug overdose. It just won't be mentioned at all. And yes, those around that person are entitled to their privacy, but the more we keep not talking about it, the more these things are just going to keep happening. So thanks to everybody here for just having the courage and the bravery to step into this space. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much, Rob. I just want to remind our audience that you can use the question and answers function in Zoom to write your questions. We will go through our first 6 questions, but we're going to go to our audience questions next before concluding our panel discussion. So in the chat, I'm going to be sharing the first question, which is focused on understanding the issues. So could you share your insights on how gender-based violence, human trafficking, and the opiate crisis are interconnected, particularly in the context of marginalized communities? And summing it up, why have we been failing? So I'm gonna ask Jasminder to go first, and then we'll go to Ty, and then Rob. Go ahead, Jasminder.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is really important and just a really important opening question for us in terms of rooting our conversation and how do all of these different things interlink, right? We might hear about one of these issues and think, okay, that's a separate problem, that's a separate problem, that's a separate problem. But they are all so deeply, deeply intertwined. And so the solutions are therefore intertwined, and therefore our conversations need to understand how those intersections happen, right? And so gender-based violence, it's really rooted in an unequal status between people of different genders. And that reflects the unbalanced distribution of power in our society, right? Whether that's social power, political power, economic power, right? And so we see that really playing out in the context of gender-based violence, in the context of human trafficking, in the context of the opiate crisis. And while anybody can be trafficked, no matter your class, your race, your gender, we know that people in our society who are the most marginalized are the most vulnerable to experiencing trafficking. That includes women, that includes gender diverse people, that includes racialized people, new immigrants, Indigenous people, right, who make up, Indigenous women in particular, who are only making up about 4% of the population, 50% of those who are being trafficked, unhoused people, people with addictions, right? And I think when it comes to trafficking in specific and addiction, one of the things to understand is that I kind of like to conceptualize it as a two-way street. So if you struggle with an addiction, that in and of itself is a vulnerability factor for luring and recruitment. Now, that's not to say if you have an addiction, you're going to be trafficked. That's not what I'm saying. But however, traffickers are picking up on this as a vulnerability factor, as one potential method of power and control that they could potentially use over a person that they are trying or attempting to traffic, right? Another important thing to note here is that people who are trafficked are more likely to have experienced some form of relational trauma in the past. Now, people who have experienced relational trauma are also more likely to experience substance use disorders, right? And so, and have that dependence over time. And so we see that sort of becoming a cycle. And then, of course, we do understand that in the process of that trafficking, a trafficker might introduce substances, as a means of control. And then also sometimes people who are survivors or victims actively, I'm going to kind of use the term interchangeably, survivor and victim. That's not to, put terms on what somebody else's experience is. Everybody might define their experiences differently, but it's just so that we all have a shared understanding of a shared terminology that we're all using while we're here in this space. And so, you know, when it comes to people who are survivors or victims, they might choose to use substances because they've experienced severe trauma, right? And so in order to cope, that might be a decision that they end up making. And so it can be used to numb pain. Traffickers can use it to potentially get people to do things that they may not otherwise be comfortable doing. And so really taking away that consent piece, and then also using it as a power and control mechanism, right? Especially if they're the supplier and they're the one who is, you know, both able to give it and then also take it away. And so we can see that there's, you know, a clear intersection between the opioid crisis, between gender-based violence, and between human trafficking. And I'd love to hear, you know, everybody else's thoughts on this as well. Ty, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
You summarized it so eloquently and so perfectly. I'm like, she left me with nothing to say. But I will say this, when I think about the intersectionality between the opioid crisis, addiction, the trauma of gender-based violence, and human trafficking, one of the things that really just like links those threads for me is trauma. Trauma. Okay. And then the exploitation of trauma. And so I can't separate that from systems of oppression. And then I start thinking about, well, who does it serve? That the most vulnerable have the least amount of support and ways and access to resource to bring themselves back up. Because what happens when you are victimized by your addiction, victimized by gender-based violence, victimized by human trafficking? You lose your power, you lose your sense of self, but then you also become free labor. You also are one less person that's voting. You're also more prone to be incarcerated, where free labor and all that goes on there gets to be exploited. And so when I think about that question of why are we failing, I can't help but wonder if we're choosing to fail. You know, they've gone over the statistics. And again, we know it's Indigenous women specifically, it's Black women, it's racialized women, it's Two-Spirit, it's trans, it's the differently able that are the most impacted. And they are the same category and group that is constantly being pushed further and further into the margins, which is why when something happens in each of those communities and we turn on the news, we don't see their names and faces. If we're lucky, we might see a stat where we're all just clumped up together. When we see the intentional wordings that go around. When I was like going through and doing my research and like looking up everything, there was one phrase that like really glued in my mind that I'm like, how is the government of Canada using this on their like Statistics Canada website? Sexual minority women, their children. So we've adultified children to help pacify reaction. So again, why are we failing? Should it really be that question, or should it be How do we stop choosing to fail?
Well said. Rob?
Wow. I appreciate how thoughtful you are in choosing your words, Ty. I think we're uncomfortable with silence. Sometimes we need to just take a moment before we say what we're going to say. The numbers are out there. We know those. A responsibility that I've always felt doing this work has been to amplify the stories of people and things that they've experienced. For example, years and years ago, a friend of mine who was struggling with substance use issues was operating, has since started operating her own business off street, but at the time was working at street level doing sex work. And this was at the time when the communicating law had come in. So it was legal to be a sex worker, but illegal to communicate for the purposes of engaging in sex work. That's like, okay, it's legal to buy this thing in the store for me, but you can't come in and talk to me about it. So what ended up happening was there was no time to scan your surroundings, make sure you're safe, because you couldn't get caught communicating. So what do you have to do? You have to get right in the car. One of the people that had picked her up tried to assault her. She managed to get away, went to the police to report it, and was essentially brushed aside. You know, she got NHI'd, you're a non-human individual. Why are you engaging in illegal activities in the first place? Which technically she wasn't. And they really just didn't take anything that she had to say seriously. A few years later, that same description, that same vehicle ended up going public as the serial killer Robert Pickton. How many lives could have not ended years earlier if they just listened to what this one person had to say? And it wasn't just her. Many people were doing that as well. And we like to think that it's changed, and it has. But, you know, very recently, a colleague of mine, you know, who was a social worker, you know, also a person with lived experience, was walking in Moss Park, got hit in the back of the head from behind, fell over, went to report it, and was essentially called, you know, well, you're a sex worker, you're trying to hustle us, by police. And was questioned on, why don't you remember what happened? Why didn't you see anyone? Well, because I blacked out, because I got hit in the back of the head from behind. So of course I didn't see anyone. Of course I don't remember, because that's how, you know, neuroscience works. And we're now in the process of kind of filing a police complaint about the experience. And of course, you know, I'm not generalizing the experiences that people have with police. This is just what's happening, you know, in these few cases. So I guess we're kind of jumping around here with some of the questions, but, you know, you highlighted the thing, Ty, about, you know, the common thread being trauma. And what I will talk about a little more as we go through this is that there is a big common thread of chronic pain. Every second person I've gotten to know in 20 plus years of doing this, if you break down their story far back enough, at some point there was an accident, car accident, fell off a ladder on the job, were in an abusive relationship and suffered head trauma, you know, being pushed out a window, being assaulted. We're only now just starting to really understand how that works. We can actually see, you know, the brain now. I'm engaged to a neuroscientist, so she can explain this way better than me. But we can actually look and see that, you know, physical and emotional pain affect our brains the same way. And those same centers are the ones that are, I don't want to say healed, but the ones that are tended to by certain substances. And that's often the need for connection. So, you know, my parents came over from India with master's degrees, couldn't get any work, doing manual labor. One cut of the hand away from ending up in that situation also. And I think the reality of accepting that this can happen to us is too much for a lot of people to accept. Therefore, they demonize another and say, well, you just made bad choices and it's your life. When it's really, for me, that's a call to action and a call to humility to say that, yes, this could just happen to me. So I have a responsibility to do the work that I do and to try and utilize whatever resources I have to help make a difference in some way. But I feel like we're getting ahead to some next questions here, so I won't go on too much.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you to Ty and Jasminder for those really eloquent responses to the first question. I feel like I've learned something from your responses so far. We're going to delve into our second question, and it's basically the theme is from awareness to prevention. So the question, and I'm going to share this in the chat, is what are the most effective strategies that organizations have encountered or will recommend for moving from raising awareness to preventing gender-based violence and human trafficking? Please share systemic reforms that we should consider. And we're going to go to Ty first, and then Rob, and then Jasminder. Ty, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm a massive advocate for grassroots. In community with community is always a big thing. I don't really think I've ever seen a large scale organization do the type of work that was needed to prevent, because many of the large scale organizations are also invested in surviving. Right? We see them popping up with new locations here, new locations there, paying off big salaries. So when I look at the big ones, I'm like, okay, what are you actually invested in? And so that's my first challenge to them. And so when we think about grassroots and what makes a grassroots organization so special is who's actually making the decisions. Is it someone who studied but is completely removed from the lived reality of the people that they're aiming to serve? Or do we have people with the lived reality who have embodied the type of vision we want to see for our communities? So number one is look at who's making decisions in your organization. Okay. Number two, those decision makers should reflect the community that they're in and come from the community. Right? Legal reform is a really big one. I'm not going to touch too much on it, but that is definitely a big key thing. But also there definitely needs to be a trauma-informed and healing-centered approach. Right? So not only are we navigating with like bringing the trauma from here to within the window of tolerance, but like how do we start moving towards a restorative version of healing so that there can be some reclaiming once again. And, you know, that can be done through, you know, different types of educations and workshops and all of that. But I think for me, the biggest thing is how do you get into community and create radical reform from the ground up? Because if we're talking about prevention, what stage are we actually talking about? Are we talking about right before it happens? Are we talking about the early stages of it? Because if we're talking about eradicating, then we literally need to be early childhood education. We literally need to remove what makes people most vulnerable. Right? And until we do that and have a radical culture shift, everything's just going to be band-aids. Everything's just going to be band-aids because there's going to constantly be vulnerable people who are going to be exploited, because there are those who are much more invested in their own personal gains than they are in the community. And so if you're not building a resilient community, you're by default building a vulnerable community.
Well said, Ty. Rob, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely. To pick up on the point that I had sort of left off on about chronic pain, you fall off a ladder at work, you're injured, you can't show up for work, you may get laid off, you lose your union status, you lose your benefits. You're trying to manage that pain, but now you can't afford medications. Where do you go? You go to the community where you know you can get it from. Opiates are a hell of a painkiller. That's often where these kinds of cycles start, because then, yes, your pain is managed, but now you're caught in the cycle of everything else that comes with opiate addiction. And then therefore you can't return to the work, and then it just kind of keeps perpetuating itself. So this is really systemic failure in inability to support individuals who are struggling. You show up at a hospital with a broken leg, they know exactly where to send you. You show up saying, I don't want to live anymore, and they don't know what to do. But again, if we look in our brains, the exact same things are happening to us. So I think the need to actually merge those things together is really important. When it comes to opiate use, I mean, this is why supervised consumption sites, naloxone training, normalizing all of these practices. It's my dream that every first aid kit will just have a naloxone kit in it. Because, it's, you can have an EpiPen, you can have a naloxone kit. And that's part of kind of what I would call a radical re-envisioning of investing in healthcare, how we define health. There's been a wonderful new movement lately, which St. Michael's Hospital is kind of part of this, and it was a major investment over a several-year period in social prescribing. So that means we look at the individual as a whole, and something like food security, access to housing, access to care, access to connection with community are things that can be prescribed just the same way you would be prescribed antibiotics if you had a cold. That is a massive step in the right direction, but it requires all of us to kind of step outside of that box that we have of how we look at health, and not just how we look at individual health, but at community health. A community is an individual. We can look at it the same way. It's an organic entity made up of individuals. So it does, as Ty has been saying, it requires being built from the ground up. When I worked with the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, that's the longest running peer-based organization in the world. It now has over 6,000 members. And the whole concept of nothing about us without us was just so obvious. Like, we didn't have the term person with lived experience then. It was just like, yeah, this affects us, therefore, it's our life. So of course we're going to be involved in this. And we're walking a dangerous line right now where we're tokenizing persons with lived experience as a box we can check to say, yes, we had a consultation and therefore we did our work, but it means continuing to have those people, of which I include myself, be meaningfully involved, which means paying a living wage, involvement in decision making. It's not just about here's an honorarium for a consultation. It's like, we need those checks and balances. And again, when the decision makers are out of touch with what's happening on the ground, that's where gaps continue to perpetuate themselves.
Well said. Jasminder?
Yeah, I think both of you spoke just so perfectly on the issues that, exist in terms of the systemic reforms that we really need. I think, Ty, you really touched on that very, very, very essential aspect of this needs to come from the community. It needs to be grassroots. And that change really needs to, not just as you just touched on, Rob, like not just be there to check a box, but rather to meaningfully engage, and not just engage, but be the ones who are the driving force behind that change. And Rob, I think you touched on some really important systemic reforms for the opioid crisis. And I think for me, I'd love to sort of just touch on some of the systemic reforms that we should consider for gender-based violence and human trafficking, right? I think we kind of need what I would call like a triple-pronged approach. I call it like, okay, there's like awareness, right? Like there's awareness of like, what is the issue, right? Like we need to understand what problem is even going on in our community. We need to identify it, we need to understand it, and we need to call it out, we need to highlight it, right? Like that's the first step. The second is action, right? Like we need to actually take action for the issue that we've raised awareness on, right? So, we need to go, beyond just saying, this is a problem in our communities, but we need investments, right? Into those communities. We need investments to ensure that, we're able to deal with the aftermath of everything that's happened. But then one of the really important points that, has been made, and I really want to highlight, is the prevention, right? We don't just want to be supporting people that are experiencing gender-based violence, that are, victims of gender-based violence, human trafficking, the opioid crisis, but we want to prevent that from happening in the first place, right? Like, I would love to not have a job in gender-based violence prevention because it just doesn't exist. Like, that is my dream, right? And how do we actually get there, right? Like we get there by eliminating wealth inequality, right? We get there by paying people fair wages. We get there by eliminating poverty. We get there by eliminating those harmful cultural beliefs. We get there by, giving people their human rights, right? When people are attempting to leave a situation, Counselor Cheng mentioned that, there was a person in her Facebook community group that was attempting to leave a situation of intimate partner violence, and they were told to go back because there were no shelter beds. And in 2019, there was a study that found that 19,000 women and children were turned away from shelter beds every night because there was no space available for them. That is such a huge failing, not just within our shelter system, but also within our housing system, within our economic system itself, that somebody has the courage to leave and they have to think about, how can I live in Toronto and afford, a $2,500 rent for a 1-bedroom apartment? How am I supposed to support children when there's no adequate, access to childcare, right? Like that's something that continually is getting delayed, right? When there isn't affordable access to food, right? When there isn't access to mental health care, how can people leave? When we say it takes 7 attempts to leave and we wonder why, these are the reasons why, right? We need to invest in those root issues in order to prevent these issues from taking place in the first place. And then of course, it just goes without saying, like, of course, we need to eliminate misogyny and the patriarchy, just being the root cause of just thinking of women and gender diverse people as less than, right? For some reason. And that we need a cultural shift. Something needs to change there as well. And so that's really, the things that I would say is that awareness, that action, and then of course the prevention, so that this stops happening in the first place.
Well said, Jasminder. Before we delve into this next question, I know we had a really, really amazing conversation about systemic reforms and what that could look like. And I know we focused on not just community consultation, but actually community decision making. We all know anti-Black racism exists. We all know, there's bigotry out there, white supremacy. And what we want to delve into right now is the impact on marginalized communities. So I'm going to ask Rob to start us off, and then we'll go to Jasminder, and then Ty to finish up with the third question. So I'm just sharing this in the chat. And the question is specifically, how does the opiate crisis exacerbate the risks and consequences of gender-based violence and human trafficking in marginalized communities? And what tailored interventions are needed?
Yeah, thanks, Walid. And sorry, I'd like to say I live with two badass women. One is my partner and one is Thelma right here. My partner had to go out for a while, so I'm doing double duty while I'm giving the panel. That's the joy of being at home, is being comforted by a 65-pound boxer. Times of disruption are frequent and they amplify existing inequities. We fell into looking at the pandemic, which is still ongoing, as this isolated thing, but it's no different from a 9/11, a Hurricane Katrina, just a massive systemic disruption that shakes what we think of the foundations of our cultures. But the communities that are already impacted the most and most excluded are going to be pushed further out. And the opiate crisis is no different from that. An example of how we can actually address that effectively. I spend a lot of time in Chicago. I feel like they're doing everything right there. You know, a lot of people say, well, isn't it dangerous? Well, no, actually. What is often said as dangerous is usually where people who don't have money and people of color live. Those are the places I go to first when I go anywhere. But the Howard Brown Health Center in Chicago was talking about, at the onset of the pandemic, what they did was they looked back on the HIV/AIDS crisis, late 80s, early 90s. And they had found for the first while that there were a lot of dominantly Latino communities in the city that seemed to have lower infection rates. So they went out to the communities to investigate and actually started providing testing and accessibility. And they found, no, the rates of infection were actually higher. They just weren't serving those communities. So when COVID hit, instead of doing what we would probably do in Toronto, which is spend 3 years doing a needs assessment to determine if we need to act on it, they skipped that stage, went straight to those communities and started providing relief support. So there's a huge component of learning from the past and making sure that we're not repeating those mistakes, because there's a lot of wisdom out there that's happened in other cities and other countries, and best practices that we can jump on instead of, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think a city like Toronto has had a very difficult history of constantly feeling like we have to invent everything ourselves. So we do reinvent the wheel a lot in Toronto. And, you know, to get to that, the philosophy behind it, this is why we talk about harm reduction. There's a tendency to jump ahead and almost place judgment and value on certain ways of doing things. And people say, well, why can't you just go to treatment? And it's like, I'll say what I always say, you can't go to treatment if you're dead. The physical withdrawal, when you have a certain level of addiction, if you stop using immediately, you'll die, because the physical withdrawal will be too much and your system will go into overload and can't handle it. We need to get there first to the, maybe everyone wants to. I haven't talked to anyone doing this work for years and years that said, you know what, I don't want to live a meaningful life. I don't want work. It's just like, shit happens in our lives and we have to find ways to deal with them. And most people that we come across and even are ourselves are just doing the best we can, with the hands that's been dealt to us. And when it comes to a harm reduction approach, that means recognizing that without housing, you have nothing. Without food, you have nothing. Let's just get through the next 24 hours. Hell, let's get through the next 20 minutes. Maybe we can get to the conversation about going to treatment down the road. That's not where we are right now. So we'll notice a shift when, conservative governments, for example, come in. They often say, well, we're not going to enable drug use with harm reduction. We're just going to invest in treatment. It's like, harm reduction is a spectrum, and complete abstinence falls on that spectrum. So 12-step programs and everything, that's totally a form of harm reduction. So is, using every day. It's a matter of meeting everybody where they're at. And that acknowledges, again, what we talked about before, how we reframe health and kind of checking our own ideas at the door and meeting everybody where they're at with respect to what they need. We also can't lose sight of the bigger picture, because if we're just, pulling individuals out of the river forever, we need to know who's throwing them in the first place. We need to go upstream. So, and that gets back to the conversations that we've had already about involvement in decision making in a meaningful capacity.
Thank you. Jasminder?
Yeah, I think that was really helpful for a lot of us to understand, the impacts that the opioid crisis has had, and then also the tailored interventions that are really needed in order for people to actually get the supports that they need. And so, I kind of want to touch on the intersections between, human trafficking and opioid use. And so one of the big things that I've seen, doing human trafficking focused work is that the biggest failing that we tend to see, whether it's, intimate partner violence, when people are going to shelter beds, whether it's for human trafficking or intimate partner violence, we're seeing a lot of programs that are either for addiction, or they are either for human trafficking, or they are either for intimate partner violence, but they are not for addiction and human trafficking, or addiction and IPV, or anything like that. And so what you end up with are addiction spaces that are not very trauma informed, don't fully understand the nuances of things like human trafficking, how that takes place, and how that could impact someone to use substances, and how that can, create very unique challenges for that person in their healing journey. And then we also, kind of see that there's very, with those very few spaces being available for harm reduction, I think a part of the reason why that's even an issue is because a lot of folks take a save and rescue approach, which is that approach of like, we're going to get this person, we're going to get them out, and their life is going to be perfect, and it's going to be awesome once they're just like away from their trafficker and they're separated from that situation, and everything is magically just going to fix itself. And that's not the reality, right? Like, we need to take a trauma-informed approach. We need to take like what's called a survivor-centered approach. So an approach that really recognizes who is the survivor, what are they experiencing, how are we going to meet their needs? And then also a strengths-based approach, which is like, what are the strengths that has kept this person here for this long? Like, how resilient, how absolutely resilient and resourceful is this person, right? That they are here, that they've survived. And so recognizing what their strengths are, and then helping them build on those strengths in order to heal, right? And so we need to understand as well, like, what needs of a trafficking survivor are being met by their trafficker. And we need to figure out what are alternative ways that we're going to support each and every single one of those needs. And so if somebody is using with their trafficker, and you want them to leave their trafficker, and the expectation is you're going to go to a shelter bed and you can't use tonight, guess what? They're not going to leave their trafficker. And that's why the save and rescue approach does not work. And so we need more detox beds for women in Ontario. That's a huge issue. We need more detox beds in general, in particular for women, especially in order to create that sense of safety and safe space. And then we also need more harm reduction programming when it comes to human trafficking and gender-based violence in specific. And so those are the two major things that I think are actually relatively low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, that are actions that can be taken relatively quickly in terms of educating, workers, training them up, so that way we can create those harm reduction programs, and that those spaces are available for people when they want to actually leave. We've had, I remember we've had cases where people want to leave, they want to go, and they're kicked out, for example, out of the shelter because they're using, right? And so you're running into all of these challenges, and we cannot reach a point where we can fix any of this if we're not taking a harm reduction approach.
Thank you, Jasminder. We'll go on to Ty, and we're going to make sure our next two questions for the remaining questions, we're going to go through a speed round just to make sure that we take some questions from the audience. So Ty, please share your wisdom with us.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick just to help with the timing. I'm not sure if anyone knows this, but the price of opioids has gone up. So there's a profit being made there. And there's a capitalistic backing to all of that. And then there's the impact of that creates deeper economic disparities, which leave folks prone to being exploited. So at the intersect of opioids and human trafficking, if I can't afford to continue my addiction without this person, and on top of that, no one wants to get into harm reduction, I have one of two options. Either stay or potentially end up in the streets in a much worse way. Right? So what are the options that we're actually giving people? Because if we don't actually start looking at what is really happening and what's going on and what the impact and effect of this addiction and how it is so consuming, you're not even able to show up to work. You're not. There's no way for you to make money in whatever way. And you'll even steal from your own family out of desperation. And so you end up losing people who might have kept you safe. And generally that's because people don't understand. So where is the education? Where is the financial support? Where is the trauma-informed interventions that include a harm reductionist approach? And where's the compassion in us to actually understanding that within that addiction, you are now operating from a survival mode. If you are in survival mode, that's all you can see. And so if all the quote unquote resources out there aren't centering on your base need of survival at the time, they're not going to be used. And so Jasminder's point of that rescue and save, like they're getting some saving from that addiction. And now you want to take away the one thing that they have without giving them a plan or a means or support to help them shift out of it. So these programs and these shelters and all of this that are so anti-harm reductionist lack a deep understanding of what is going on and will continue to fail until that is changed.
Well said, Ty. Well said. So our keynote speaker, Councillor Lily Chang, spoke about the Wounded Healer, the book, The Wounded Healer. And our next question is going to focus on cultural competency in healing. So I'm just going to share the question in the chat for our audience. But the question is, and we'll start off with Jasminder this time and go on to Rob and then Ty, is in your experience, how does incorporating cultural support and understanding impact the healing process for survivors of gender-based violence and human trafficking?
So I think this question is imperative, and it's not just like, so I chair the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee at my organization, Victim Services Toronto. And rather than it being an afterthought, right? Of like, oh yeah, by the way, we need to also include culture. Rather than it being an afterthought, it needs to be embedded in the fabric of the work that we do. And that includes education for staff. That includes adequate supports and resources for our clients, because it helps us build trust, right? When people feel that we, respect their cultural values, their norms, their ideologies. And then also there's another element as well, where oftentimes we talk about, just like serving people in the culture that they come from. I think there's also a huge element of cultural empowerment, right? Like culture being this element that can be deeply incorporated in the healing process. I think I've got just an unmuted person just in the background there, but incorporating those cultural elements into that process can really, really help empower survivors by reinforcing that really like positive connection to their own culture. And it becomes a celebration, it becomes an empowerment rather than just an afterthought. And so really deeply understanding what that looks like in order to help support folks kind of to reestablish those connections or to help deepen those connections really does help. And, for example, like I'm a South Asian woman, a lot of my healing comes from meditation and yoga and those practices. And, I'd also love to hear more from Ty as well, because I know you use so many different, methods of healing as well to really help people move forward. So I am so fascinated and interested to hear both from Ty and Rob as well on this.
Why don't we go with Ty next, and then Rob? Go ahead, Ty.
I'm next. Okay. The first thing that I'm going to say is, if you're not in and with community, there's no competency then for me. like to come and helicopter in and say, oh, let me come, let me save you, let me like fix you. And it's like, who are you? Like, oh, I'm a white person with a big degree and I'm here because I love you. And I'm just like, okay, who are you? And what do you even know about me? And I think people can forget about the delicate nuances that go on within different communities. There are a lot of child marriages happening in Canada, but they're kept in the community. There are a lot of girls and young women and trans and two-spirit who will not talk to someone outside of their community. And so if you are not from that community, how are you going to effectively create change and earn trust and not be seen as someone coming in and trying to tell the population what to do and show up as knowing more than them? And so when we talk about cultural support and the healing process, I mentioned before, and it was in my bio, that I'm currently working towards my designation in psychotherapy. And I'll tell you right now, I absolutely hate everything that we're learning. And I'm just doing it to get those letters at the end of my name. And everything that I do is going to basically barely relate back to anything there. Because most of the interventions that we currently have in relation to healing and even how we apply a trauma-informed lens and a harm reductionist strategy come from research done on white people, by white people, for white people. And so the things that are indigenous to my community that have healed and sustained for centuries and thousands of years aren't even a part of the conversation until they've been empirically tested. And so if you're going to come in my community and be like, oh, well, here's what we've empirically tested that's going to help. And, here's what the research says. So come, let's go and heal. It's not going to land for me. And it's not going to land for people in the community. It took me nearly 15 years to finally find a therapist who had a decent level of cultural competency that I can work with. And even that was lacking. And people, we have to remember that every system that isn't intentionally and actively anti-racist by default upholds white supremacy. That there's just no in between. You're either doing one or the other. And so if you actually genuinely care about showing up in culturally sensitive ways, you not only have to collaborate with, but you have to be in with community. And if they are not the ones who are making decisions about their own community, then you are exhibiting some level of saviorism. Like, that's just really how I see it. The lack of work and research on natural medicines, the lack of work and research on somatic-based practices, and the co-opting of many Indigenous practices to be repackaged and shot back out with partial understanding is so harmful. Okay. So if we want to show up for community, what are we willing to give up in order to do that? And by which I mean, how attached are we to the way that status quo is operating right now? And how much are we going to invest in dismantling things that are supposed to help, but really just end up replicating white supremacy and harm? Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Read a book. That was amazing, and so informative and thought-provoking. Rob, you want to go next before we talk about allyship?
Yeah. This conversation came up recently. I was part of a team that was training phone operators for the 988 emergency crisis number, which just rolled out last week. It's a suicide and mental health hotline that's nationwide. It's a new 3-digit number. And we talked about or noticed a tendency to want to go to the helping place right away. That immediately we feel like someone's reaching out to our service, therefore we need to solve the problem. And taking that, what we're referring to in our conversation here is that sort of help and save approach, or what I also call just the helping industrial complex. It's like we disempower individuals that way. Someone who feels they have no control over anything in their lives and doesn't want to live anymore, then calls somebody and that person says, here's what I'm going to do for you. That's taking the wrong approach. It needs to be the approach of, let's work on this together. What do you need right now, and how can I support that? This is jumping a little into the allyship topic, but someone in the chat had referred to living in a culture of misogyny. And when I was working in downtown Eastside Vancouver, even an organization as progressive and forward thinking as Vandu was, it was a very male dominated space. And I came in and asked, why are there no women's groups? And eventually unpacked the fact that over several years, it had just become a very male-centric space. What that required me to do, as the person who was able to have the office be closed, said, okay, we're going to close the office, and the women's group's going to have the office for the day. I'm just going to get out of the way. I'm not going to get involved in any of this. I'm going to do what I can, which means I can close the office. And sure enough, through that process, then the harm reduction groups, the overdose prevention groups, everything, women started to feel safer coming into this space, knowing that they had time carved out that was theirs. of course, that needed to just be the norm all the time, but we had to start somewhere because we were undoing, decades of just ingrained, unconscious, misogyny, never mind all the conscious stuff that was going on there. So I feel like that just kind of segues into the next question, but what we were talking about here just made me think of that.
Thank you, Rob. Well, the next question is focused on allyship. And the question is, can you discuss the role of individual allyship in fostering social change and supporting the actions needed to address these systemic issues effectively? And we'll start off with, I think we'll go with Ty, and then we'll move on to Jasminder, then Rob.
I'm going to be real honest. I hate the term ally and allyship because it's not enough. We need accomplices and we need abolitionists. Because if you're not willing to dismantle the system, and if you're still invested in the system, then nothing's going to change. So again, what are you willing to risk to enact change? Because we need radical reform in order to be able to do the deep work of showing up effectively and eradicating. Because right now what we're doing isn't eradication. It's, okay, how do we make it 1% better so that way, we feel good that we did something. Like, oh, look, it's tiny bit, the graph went down a little bit, so let's pat ourselves in the back. Do you want to remove systems of oppression and remove conditions that leave people vulnerable to this intense level of harm? Or do you want to make yourself feel good for doing something? Right. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is really sustainability. I think the Montgomery bus boycott was just under 400 days long. That's commitment. The civil rights movement was like 16 years or something like that. Yeah, that's commitment. And right now, other than on days of observation, days of remembrance, what is our continual commitment and how does it show up? Or do we just come when we're cued by Twitter or Instagram to remember to care? Or are we invested in finding ways to be consistent and persistent and dedicated? And that's really a question each one of us has to ask within ourselves. But if we don't start with an honest inventory of what it is we want and what it is we're willing to do to manifest it, then we're just Band-Aid over Band-Aid over Band-Aid over Band-Aid and wondering why nothing has changed. Well, nothing's changed because nothing's changed. The system's still the exact same system. So if we're not changing the root cause, the system, everything else to me is mute. So I don't need allies. I need accomplices and abolitionists.
What's that time? We have one last question. We want to take some questions from the audience. I'm going to go to Rob next and then Jasminder. To reflect on what Ty said and the question.
Well, I mean, same as Jasminder, I'm South Asian, so I will quote one of our wise elders, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, we need to be the change we want to see in the world. And it starts with us. It starts with how you treat those around you. I was really touched by the opening conversation earlier in this forum about men and how we act, how we treat those around us. You know, don't take advantage of the kindness and compassion of the women in your lives. Cook the food for the family, take out the trash, you know, like we tend to default to these roles, you know, subconsciously. And we need to change that. And we have to end the cycles we've inherited by changing our own actions. I'm engaged to a neuroscientist. Do you think I know more than her in any possible way? I got some street smarts, you know, I grew up in the hood, but you know, she's the brains of the operation, and I'm fully okay to acknowledge that. I am totally okay, and that doesn't mean I am somehow weak. It just means, you know, admitting, you know, emotion or anything like that, and seeing humility as weakness is again just perpetuating that toxic masculinity that is at the heart of a lot of our culture. So, and it starts with us. This is really the bottom line of what I'll have to say on that.
Amazing advice. Thank you. Jasminder?
Yeah, I think I just don't think there's a more perfect way to say what Ty and Rob have already, you know, touched on. I think, yeah, I mentioned this earlier, a lot of people conceptualize gender-based violence as a women's issue. It is not. Misogyny, the patriarchy, racism, sexism, homophobia, you know, ableism, all of these things impact each and every single one of us, right? Classism, white supremacy, like this does not even support the people who are a part of that group. When you actually get down to it, it doesn't even support those who it claims to be supporting. And so what we need to do is we really do need that radical shift, right, in our minds. And I think, you know, what I'll do is I'm going to call everybody in, everybody that's here within this space today. This is just my calling in of everybody, of this conversation. I know for some people it might be an opener. I know for some people it may be a continuation. But really for us to see this as a part of a much, much, much broader and deeper journey for ourselves, of collective healing and of collective growth. So that's what I, you know, there's nothing that could be said more perfectly than what Rob and Ty have already highlighted.
Thank you so much. So our last question, I'm going to ask you folks to keep it to 1 point. And this is our last question, and it's focus on the call to action. So as we observe the National Day of Remembrance and action to end violence against women, what immediate actions can individuals and communities take to shape a future that is free from violence and exploitation? So name an action, maybe maximum 2, that we could share with the community. And we'll start off with Rob, and then we'll go on to Jasminder and end off with Ty. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big one. I mean, I could say, you know, sign petitions and send emails and support policy change and all these things, but really it's about saying yes in my backyard, opening your hearts, and that means opening your doors. I hope that doesn't sound too abstract and not tangible in terms of like one thing, but that's an approach that we need to take in terms of the overall guiding lens that we apply to everything. It's, you know, abolition again that's a way of life. And we need to look inward. We need to decarcerate ourselves as well in that process. And that's one of the hardest things to do. But again, that's where it all starts.
Excellent. Jasminder?
I think, Rob, you just touched on the individual and you know what we can do as people. So I'll kind of, you know, zoom out a little bit. I think, you know, And this is in relation to not, this is all of this together, right? Is what's going to really create that change. I think when we say we're going to invest in ending gender-based violence, that is already like a failure, right? You cannot invest in ending gender-based violence if you are not investing in the social, political, and economic conditions that are creating a vulnerability to that violence in the first place. So we need investments in housing. We need affordable access to childcare. We need affordable health care. We need affordable mental health supports. And we just need all of those things to come together and so much more if we want to make sure that we actually have healthy and healed communities. Those are the conditions that have been created, and those are the conditions that are currently being perpetuated, and those are the conditions that are not being ameliorated through laws and public policies. So what we really need to do is we need to ensure that we create this shift over to ensuring that we meet each and every single one of those root causes so that this is no longer an issue.
Well said. Ty?
I'll keep it short. Decenter yourself, decolonize yourself, and dismantle the system.
Wow. That is well put. I just want to thank our audience for submitting questions. I'm just going to quickly read a question from the audience for our panelists. And the question is in the chat is, how can community-centered healing and health practices be built under current legislation? And what legislation needs change? How do you learn to be a community healer when study options are not community focused? So I think the question centers on legislative change as well. So who'd like to take that on?
You know what, this actually reminds me, and I know there's probably some people in attendance here who have heard me talk about this before, but I coordinated a justice studies program at an Indigenous college in Vancouver about 16 or so years ago. And in the first week I was there, I had a meeting with the Dean of Education, and he asked me, so the first conversation, he said, "Do you work out?" I thought it was kind of odd to be asked by, first year report to with that, but like, hey, this is a new journey, so I'm just going to roll with it. I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "If you need to leave in the middle of the day, go have a workout, have a shower, have a meal, come back, and that takes you 2 hours, just go do it. Because there are 4 parts of you on your medicine wheel, and if one of those is out of balance, all of you is going to be out of balance. Whereas if you are taken care of on all those sides, your students are going to benefit, your colleagues are going to benefit. This college as a whole is an organic entity, and if there's one of those pieces that's off, we don't hyper focus on that piece to fix it. We look at the whole structure. I've never worked in an environment that was that grounded, that healthy, and I've taken that with me everywhere I've gone since. But the onus is still on me to self-advocate for that, because employees, most of our systems and our organizations are still these Western capitalist models, and employees are seen as units of production instead of part of something greater. So, you have to get the letters of accommodation. You have to go through all these bureaucratic processes, which if you're someone who's, like in my case, just, coming years ago, coming out of rehab and going back to work, and it was just like the thought of having to fill out another form to be able to just, go and have a workout in the middle of the day so I can be present was overwhelming. So I've kind of made it my goal to just make that the baseline of what we do anywhere. You start working somewhere, and the first thing you say is, what do you need to succeed here? And that's going to look different for everybody. It could mean, working different hours. It could mean you do yoga in the middle of the day. You do meditation. You go and take your dog for a walk. Like what is it that's going to, and only you know that. So I think that's a critical issue in order to be, what we would call a community healers. We need to actually be, heal ourselves. The people we work with aren't stupid. They can tell if you're saying, you need to stop drinking. They're like, you're so hungover right now. It's like we need to model the things that we hope to see also. And that means, again, like, it's funny, Judge Minder, you said, taking a wider view, because I'm usually accused of taking the bigger view. I feel like I'm speaking a lot about the individual today, but this is placing ourselves in that larger picture, because I feel like that makes it less overwhelming. Like, okay, if I can control this, it will spread out, from just me. But yeah, so I think, again, decolonizing our organizations, and providing core fundamental health supports, for everybody will go a long way, because, again, we're just inheriting generations of trauma before us, and then they're embedded into us, and we're fighting against them right from day one. And the more structures that we have that are going to allow us to exercise those, just the better off we're all going to be. We are the people we serve. So.
Before I pass it on to Tashin, I want to ask Jasminder and Ty if there's something you'd like to add.
He said it all.
Agreed.
Well said. So I want to pass it on back to Tashin. Tashin, please take it away. And I want to, before concluding our panel discussion, I want to thank our panelists for your brilliance in articulating supports and what reforms are needed to change this system that has failed so many. You talked about the intersectionality of the opiate crisis, human trafficking, and also femicide, abuse against women. And I think it's important for us to reflect on what those reforms are. And I know Tashin's gonna sum it up before we conclude our discussion today. So thank you once again, and Tashin, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for sharing your expertise. I know I was writing down notes, just going through my notebook page after page, because there's so much great knowledge and wisdom that's been shared. And you folks do such incredible work that is trauma-informed, survivor-centric, and has that harm reduction framework, which is needs to be shared and existing in all organizations. So thank you. And I know we are near the end of our event, and we will be doing a grounding exercise that's going to be led by Chris Leonard. So Chris, if you're here with us, please, you can turn on your camera to guide us through the grounding exercise. Hi, Chris. Amazing. Perfect. I'm going to just share my screen and you can take it from there.
All right. So greetings, everyone. Pleasure to be invited to come and, help us to shift into whatever we're shifting into after we leave this space. So I want to invite everyone. I was listening in to the panel, and the conversation was rich. It was fulsome. It was engaging heart, belly, spirit. And so I want to, in this moment, invite all of us, including our panelists who were holding space, to if you choose, because everything is an invitation, to let's do some collective breaths. So when we breathe and feel, we have an opportunity to feel a little bit more deeply and to think a little bit more clearly. So in this moment, the invitation is for us to take a nice full belly breath in through our nose. And then exhale through our mouth, and we can make a sign, we can unmute. And exhale and let it out. Breathing in and exhale. One more time, deep breath in if you so choose. And exhale. Conversations about gender-based violence, white supremacy, all the systems and structures that feel like they have every day we wake up, like they're on our neck. We can't breathe. These are things that impact our nervous system, that keeps us in fight, flight. freeze, or fawning. It's like, and so when we breathe intentionally, giving ourselves permission to inhale and exhale, we're helping our nervous system, the part of our nervous system that is responsible for rest, for repair, for restoring, we're helping it to come back to center. So breathing is not a yogi hokey. And I heard Ty talk about the importance of somatic practices that bring our breath and our body. It's like a conversation. When we breathe, when we do grounding, when we engage in somatic practices, it's like we're inviting our bodies and our breath into a conversation that centers us, that says, I am here, here I am. So the other thing I want to invite us to do before we close, and I know we don't have a lot of time, is some movement. Movement is medicine. And so whether it's shaking, dancing, and all we need to do is watch children, and we know that they have not forgotten the message that they came to this side of the divide with when they transition into this world. Shaking, dancing, punching, dropping, anything that we need to shift energy, it is medicine. Movement is a conversation, and a conversation that brings our breath and our bodies together too. And so in this moment, I want to invite us, if you're sitting, if you're standing, to just, if you're sitting, to stand. If you can't, if you're not able to, or it's not what your body is wanting in this time, you can remain sitting, but to just stand, and we're just going to move. We're just going to shake it off. Shaking and remembering to breathe and saying, remember, movement is medicine that says, I am here. Here I am. And all the things that are wanting to disappear us, all the structures and the people that want to decenter us, we are choosing to say, I am claiming space. And I'm claiming space more intentionally with awareness that I am here and here I am. So shaking it off, shaking it up, shaking it down, and shifting that energy that might have been building as you were listening to the conversation. As powerful as it was, it could have been touching places in herself, in her spirit, in her hearts, in her bodies, in her minds. And so the grounding, the shaking, the breathing, maybe after we're finished, put on some music and dance, 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 shift. So one last thing I want to leave you with is a reflection. We don't have time to do it, but as you're leaving this space, to invite the question, what helps my body to clear? What helps my body to clear? The shit that I pick up from out there in the world every time I step out of my door. Actually, we don't even have to step out of our door. Just turn on mainstream media. We're looking at our social medias where all that stuff is coming in. What helps my body to clear that crap? What helps to calm and soothe my body? As we're doing kick-ass work out in the world, it matters that we center ourselves. It matters that we move with awareness of what helps me to clear. And that should be like an antidote. In Buddhism, we talk about antidotes, whether it's a mantra or some mudra that we do to shift in the moment, a mind protector. We need to carry this with us. During the pandemic, we were told to have your PPEs, your personal protective equipment. I don't know what the E was for, but what are our PPEs? What are the psychological PPEs that you need, that I need, that we need to navigate these times that we're living through? So think about what helps my body to clear, what helps my body to soothe. And that is That's the PPE that you want to carry with you. And so one last thing I want to leave you with, and there's a point in the center of her palm. It's an acupressure point. And this is a point that, and we tend to do it instinctively when we're, maybe stressed or anxious, we tend to rub our hands, but we can actually activate the meridian to help shift feelings in our bodies and help to stimulate reconsolidation after a moment that might have left us feeling dysregulated. So remembering our breath, conversation with our body, movement as medicine, a conversation with our body and our breath, and ways reflecting and having in our toolkit, having maybe even on your phone as a reminder, the things that help your body to clear, to center, to calm, to soothe. And last thing, because I know I don't want to keep you, because don't want to add to your anxiety, those of you who have things to do and places to go. Thinking about ways of practicing self-compassion that might look as simple as beaming love. Let's say, we tend to offer love to others, but 1,000 times more, whatever we're offering to others, we want to be beaming that to ourselves. So as we close this conversation, thinking about centering in ourselves, calming and soothing ourselves with our breath, remembering that we have a right to breathe and feel, remembering to move because movement is medicine, that movement is a conversation between our breath and our body that says, I am here, here I am. Wishing you all an easeful evening. Thank you. Remember to resource yourself as you leave this space. Whatever supports you, resource yourself.
Thank you, Chris, for that powerful grounding exercise. And I love how you mentioned like movement in medicine. And I think a lot of times we store a lot of our pain and trauma within our body. That movement can shift that energy outwards instead of keeping it within. So thank you so much for sharing that piece. And I'll also acknowledge that we are a little over time. I hope you folks can stay, but if you need to go, thank you all for being here. Right now, we will be just having a moment of silence to remember those who were impacted by the Montreal Massacre and remember their names. So right now, I'll invite everyone just to take a moment of silence with us here today. Thank you all once again for being here. For those of you who are still present, we are sharing a survey link. Thank you for being so understanding as we've navigated the hiccups, little technical difficulties here and there. As we navigate through Zoom, things may take place, and thank you once again for being so patient, being so understanding, and really sticking with us and like listening to our panelists, sharing your thoughts. It's been such a pleasure facilitating as your MC and learning from all the incredible panelists. There's a lot that I learned throughout this event, and I hope that you folks will be able to take some of the lessons as we go beyond today. And I would just like to really quickly share some closing remarks. From the conversations that we've had today, it is so evidently clear that the system has failed us numerous times. The anger, frustration, grief, and all the emotions that you may feel in between are just so incredibly valid, because it's infuriating when the systems are in fact just working the way they were designed to be operating. Many marginalized communities have been pushed to the edge, and it's something that we notice and witness till this day. And that's why, while there may be importance towards the awareness of this issue, in fact, I'm learning at all times, we want to really push the importance of also taking sustainable actions that create generational changes. And during this event, we explored so many ideas and expertise that were brought to the light to really push the quote unquote invisible issue shared by our key panelists, as well as keynote speakers. And these are some of the takeaways that I was able to jot down. So opening our heart, decolonizing our selves and our systems, being trauma-informed, and having that healing-centric approach that understands the different forms of challenges that someone may experience towards their healing journey, and that we should call people in so that we can collectively take action and be a part of the deeper journey towards collective healing and growth. And that this kind of events and the work that we do, we hope that we can just completely retire, and that there are going to be preventative actions and that we can take place, such as eliminating, poverty, advocating against discrimination, focusing on human rights, so that we can live in a world where gender-based violence doesn't have to exist in the first place. So there has to be an investment in root causes to prevent it from happening. There needs to be actions towards harm reduction instead of continuously reinventing the wheel. And the framework of cultural support. So instead of it being an afterthought, but it needs to be embedded in all our work towards education, providing adequate support and resources, because cultural support and culture can be empowerment. And it is the fact that when we are intentionally moving and willing to continuously learn, unlearn, and have an open mind to do better, it is truly a commitment that has a harm reduction framework that is trauma-informed, survivor-centric. And what we speak here today, I'm sure the conversation can continue. And we hope that you will look into some of the incredible organizations who are here, who created and who made this event possible. And we'll also be sharing Get Help page, Laura Freedom's Femicide, Microcide on the chat box. And at this time, I would just like to invite the committee members who made this event possible. Thank you for making this happen, as well as to all the participants who've been here with us. And we hope that you leave here today with a renewed sense of community and support, knowing that we can make change happen. It may be a long fight, but it will be worth the fight because we're not doing it alone. We have such incredible agencies and teams who are actively working and relentlessly working day and night to make change happen towards the role of ending gender-based violence, because we as individuals have the collective responsibility for the generations to come. So thank you all for being here today. From the bottom of my heart, expressing my utmost gratitude to be our MC. And we have some lovely faces here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so you folks can see them. So thank you all for being here once again. And I'll leave the floor open to any of the community members if you want to share any thoughts.
I know some folks have to leave, so we should take that photo first, if that's okay.
Yes. Great job, guys. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on social media, and for more information, check out our website.